Long ago, in a quiet village of Old Musashi province, two woodcutters worked the deep winter forests together. The elder was named Mosaku, a man gray in the trade, and the younger was Minakichi, barely 18 that year. At dawn the two of them walked 5 cold miles to a distant wood, and at dusk they walked the same long road home. Between the silent forest and their warm village ran a wide and restless river of dark winter water. A ferryman carried travelers across in a flat wooden boat, for no bridge had ever held for long against the yearly floods. One gray and bitter evening the two tired men turned toward home, their bundles of firewood heavy on their backs. When they reached the crossing that evening, the ferryman had gone away, and his boat lay chained upon the far shore. The wind had risen off the water, sudden, and the first white flakes came slanting steadily down. There was no way over the river now, and no shelter near but the ferryman's little hut. The hut was a poor and empty place, with no fire pit inside and one small wooden door. Yet it kept the worst of the wind away, and the two weary men were glad of little. They laid close together in their straw coats, meaning to wait until the storm should pass. The storm grew wilder as the dark came down, and the frail hut shook and trembled in the gusts. Snow hissed against the dry reeds and heaped high along the walls until the little door groan's frame. Old Mosaku fell asleep at once from weariness, but young Minakichi lay awake a long while, listening. For a restless while Minakichi lay listening to the roaring river and the crying of the wind. The deep cold crept through the thin straw and into his bones, and still he could not sleep. At last a silver light began to glow softly beyond the thin reed walls of the hut. He woke with a sudden start to find the little wooden door blown wide upon the howling night. Snow drove into the hut in a pale and silent flood, and the cold lamp of the moon lit everything within. And there, in that strange white brightness, Minakichi saw at once that the two of them were no longer alone. A woman clothed all in white was bending low above old Mosaku in the place where he lay sleeping. She leaned close above his upturned face, gently, as a mother leans over a sleeping child. Her slow breath came drifting out like bright pale smoke into the bitter freezing air of the hut. The white woman breathed upon the old man, once and slowly, and a fine mist covered him over. Pale frost spread in delicate patterns across his cheeks and stilled the quiet rising and falling of his chest. When at last she drew herself back and away, old Mosaku did not stir or breathe again. Then the white woman turned about, and Minakichi felt his cold body locked tight and rigid with fear. She came gliding smoothly toward him across the straw, low and weightless as a drift of blowing snow. He tried with all his strength to cry aloud, and yet no sound would leave his throat. She bent low above him now, just exactly as she had bent above the old man a moment before. For a terrible moment she studied his frightened young face by the silver moonlight. The white frost of her breath hung close about him, and Minakichi lay still and waited only to die. But something in the young man's smooth and boyish face seemed to soften the white woman's heart. In a low whisper she told him that she had meant to treat him as she had treated the other. And yet he was young and fair to look upon that she found she could not. She warned him then, in a voice as thin and sighing as the winter wind that moves through frozen reeds. He must never once tell a living soul the smallest part of what he had seen that night. If ever he should speak of her to anyone, she would know, and she would come. Even his mother he must never tell, she said again to him, not one word ever. Then she rose up lightly and turned herself away toward the pale and open doorway of snow. Her slender shape grew thin as gauze, and the driving snow seemed to pass straight through her body. In a breath she was gone, out into the white and roaring heart of the endless storm. Minakichi found his voice again and his frozen limbs, and he called out desperately into the howling dark. Only the wind gave any answer to him, and old Mosaku lay still beside the open door. Woodcutters found young Minakichi at dawn, half frozen and senseless beside the stiffened body of his old companion. They warmed him and carried him home, and over many days his lost strength returned to him. Of the woman in white he said nothing, for her warning stayed locked deep within his heart. A year later, upon one mild and greening spring evening, Minakichi met a young girl upon the road. She was tall and slender and pale, and she was traveling alone on foot toward the distant capital. Her voice, she told him softly, had once been trained for service within a great and noble house. They walked along and talked together as they went, and neither one of them wished the quiet road to end. She had no living parents left in the world now, she said, and no certain place to go. Before the roofs of the village came into sight ahead, Minakichi had already lost his heart. He brought the girl, whose gentle name was Oyuki, home at last to his old mother's small house. His mother welcomed her at the door, and before the year had fully turned the two of them were married. Oyuki proved a kind and gentle wife in Avei, and the little house grew of light. In the peaceful years that followed, Oyuki bore her husband Minakichi 10 strong and fair children. The village women often marveled among themselves that she never once seemed to age or to grow tired. She stayed as pale and slender and smooth as the young girl he had first met upon the spring road. One deep winter night, when all the children lay fast asleep, Oyuki sat sewing beside the oil lamp. The soft and yellow light fell gently upon her face and made it look strangely young and white. Minakichi watched her there for a quiet while, and an old buried memory rose within him. Watching her sitting there still and pale, he remembered a night from his distant youth long buried. He remembered the freezing hut, and the roaring storm, and the white woman bending low in the terrible cold. The strange likeness struck him now and sharply that he could no longer hold it inside. Softly and wondering, he told her that her quiet face had wakened in him a strange old dream. He spoke then of a long past night of snow, and a pale woman, and a silent death. He had never once told a soul, he said to her, until this quiet hour. As he spoke on, Oyuki grew still, and her thin needle hung motionless above the pale cloth. She kept her face turned toward her work, and the warm room seemed to cool by slow degrees around them. When his last soft words were done, a heavy silence came to fill the house. Then Oyuki quietly set Der sewing upon her knee and lifted up her white and shining face. The small lamp flame bent suddenly low, just as though an unseen breath had crossed the room. In a strange low voice that he half remembered from long ago, she softly spoke his name aloud. "That woman you saw within the snow was myself," she said quietly, "and it was I whom you watched. I warned you clearly on that night that a spoken word would one day cost you your life. Only these sleeping children of ours stay my cold hand from you upon this night. For the sake of these children alone do I let you go on living this night," she told him low. "See well that you care for them tenderly, and give them never the smallest cause to weep for you. If ever they should have true reason to weep, I will return, and I will not be kind." Even as she spoke these last cold words, her voice grew thin and high as the winter wind. Her slender white shape wavered and began to melt and dissolve into a bright and freezing vapor. It rose up shimmering and pale toward the small black smoke hole in the dark roof above them. Up through the little smoke hole the pale cold mist streamed silently and was lost at last into the night. Oyuki was gone from him, and no living voice would ever call her back again to that house. Only the snow kept softly falling, gentle and endless, over the still and silent sleeping village. And so the same soft snow that quietly spares us is the snow that patiently remembers. Minakichi kept his 10 children always close about him, and he never once spoke that name aloud again. Somewhere out in the white and endless winter silence, they say, she is listening for it still.